March 7th, 1945, 0445 hours, Northern Luzon, Philippines. Colonel Takeshi Yamamoto stood knee-deep in the muddy Cagayan River, watching his engineers struggle with pontoon bridge sections. The water temperature hovered at 68 degrees Fahrenheit, lukewarm, deceptive. Beneath the surface, currents pulled at 4 knots, strong enough to yank a man downstream if he lost his footing. 6 hours, his chief engineer reported, minimum. Yamamoto nodded. 6 hours to construct a bridge capable of supporting Type 95 Hago tanks and artillery pieces. 6 hours during which American forces couldn't possibly cross. The river was 140 meters wide here, 12 feet deep in the channel. Infantry could wade the shallows, but vehicles? Impossible without a bridge. He'd studied American amphibious doctrine at the Imperial Japanese Army Staff College in 1938. The Americans excelled at beach landings, specialized craft, extensive preparation, massive logistical support. But inland river crossings? Those required engineering units, pontoon bridges, significant time. Time was the weapon. His defensive positions on the far bank were formidable. Interlocking fields of fire, camouflaged bunkers, artillery pre-sighted on the bridge approaches. When the Americans began construction, his guns would destroy the first sections. They'd try again. He'd destroy those too. Standard river defense doctrine, proven effective from the Rapido to the rower. The Americans, he'd been told, had approximately 200 vehicles in the advancing column. Trucks, jeeps, artillery tractors, supply vehicles, all worthless without a crossing point. Yamamoto allowed himself a rare smile. The Cagayan would buy him 48 hours, maybe more. What Colonel Yamamoto didn't know what Japanese intelligence had catastrophically failed to understand was that 3,000 meters behind the American front line, 47 strange vehicles were starting their engines. They looked ridiculous, like someone had welded a boat hull onto a truck chassis. The Americans called them DUKWs, pronounced duck. And they didn't need his bridge. In 18 minutes, the first DUKW would enter the Cagayan River at 6 miles per hour, carrying 5,000 pounds of ammunition, and exit on the far bank without slowing down. The smile on Yamamoto's face would die before sunrise. 2 years earlier, June 1943, Sparkman Stevens Yacht Design Office, New York City. The air conditioning was broken, again. 87 degrees inside the cramped office on Madison Avenue. Rod Stevens Jr., yacht designer and engineer, stared at the blueprints with sweat dripping onto the paper, creating small translucent circles. They want us to do what? Dennis Puleston, British liaison officer, repeated the requirement. Design an amphibious truck. Must carry 5,000 pounds or the 25 men. Operate in 10-foot seas. Travel 50 miles per hour on roads. Enter and exit water without ramps. And they need it in 6 months. Stevens laughed, then realized Puleston wasn't joking. That's 3 different vehicles. You're asking for a boat, a truck, and something that transforms between them. That's engineering fantasy. The brass calls it war necessity. The project emerged from a disastrous lesson. Operation Husky, the invasion of Sicily in July 1943, had revealed a critical flaw in amphibious logistics. Landing craft could bring troops and equipment to the beach. But then what? Supplies piled up on beachheads, while trucks sat useless in the surf. Engineers built temporary piers. Storms destroyed them. Equipment rusted in salt water. The U.S. Army needed something that could operate in water like a boat and on land like a truck. something that could drive off a transport ship, cross miles of open ocean, climb onto a beach, and immediately join a motorized convoy. Might, every engineer said it was impossible. The problem was physics. Boats need buoyancy, hollow hulls, minimal weight. Trucks need durability, heavy frames, solid construction. A boat-shaped truck would be too heavy to float. A truck-shaped boat would sink. But Stevens had one advantage. He didn't design military vehicles. He designed racing yachts. He approached the problem differently. Instead of modifying a truck to float, he'd design a hull that could drive. The base platform, GMC's 2.5-ton truck chassis, the CCCKW already proven reliable. Engine, GMC 270 cubic inch inline 6, producing 104 horsepower. Drive system. This is where it got weird. Stevens designed a propeller that engaged through the rear hull. On land, power went to the wheels. In water, flip a lever and power transferred to the prop. Steering in water used the front wheels like rudders. The hull had to be watertight, buoyant enough to carry 5,000 pounds plus crew, and maintain the truck's ground clearance. Stevens specified one 4-inch steel for the hull, shaped like a boat bottom, a V-hull that could cut through waves. The prototype weighed 14,500 pounds empty. It looked absurd. Yellow Truck Coach Manufacturing Company in Pontiac, Michigan, built the first test vehicle in August 1942. Workers nicknamed it the Duck because of its designation, DUKW, D = 1942 model year, U = utility, K = front-wheel drive, Blue = dual rear axles. The name stuck. Test day arrived with appropriate drama. Provincetown Harbor, Massachusetts. October 1942. Water temperature, 54 degrees. Air temperature, 48 degrees. Wind, 15 knots, creating 3-foot chop. The driver, Sergeant Paul Gray, had never driven anything remotely similar. Truck training? Yes. Boat training? No. Amphibious training? Nobody had invented that yet. He drove the DUKW down the boat ramp at 4 miles per hour. The wheels left solid ground. The hull settled into the water. "We're floating," his passenger, an Army Corps of Engineers lieutenant, noted unnecessarily. Gray engaged the propeller and pushed the throttle. The DUKW surged forward at 5.5 miles per hour. It handled like a drunk whale wallowing, slow to respond, frighteningly top-heavy. After 20 minutes, Gray drove it back onto shore without stopping. Wheels grabbed pavement. Water streamed from the hull. The DUKW continued up the beach and onto the highway. Total transition time, water to land, 11 seconds. The lieutenant wrote in his report, "Vehicle performs as specified, but appears dangerously unstable in waves. Recommend additional testing before approval." What he should have written, "We just obsoleted every river crossing doctrine in existence." But nobody realized that yet. The Army ordered 2,000 DUKWs for initial production. Defense contractors thought it was a waste. Generals thought it was a novelty. Infantry thought it was a death trap. Private First Class James Hendricks, assigned to the 462nd Amphibian Truck Company in March 1943, recorded his first impression. "They showed us this thing that looked like a boat, that was having an identity crisis. Half the guys laughed. The other half asked to transfer. I figured if it was crazy enough to exist, it was crazy enough to keep me alive." Training took place at Camp Edwards, Massachusetts, and Camp Gordon, Johnston, Florida. The curriculum was unprecedented because nobody knew how to drive an amphibious truck. Instructors created doctrine in real time. Lesson 1. The DUKW is not a boat. Don't treat it like one. Lesson 2. The DUKW is not a truck. don't treat it like one either. Lesson 3. Figure out what it actually is, and don't die while learning. Crews discovered peculiarities through trial and error. The DUKW handled differently when loaded versus empty. Wind pushed it around like a sail in water. Waves could flip it if you hit them wrong. The propeller could snag on underwater obstacles. Salt water corroded everything. But it could do something no other vehicle on Earth could do. Drive into an ocean, travel miles through open water, climb onto a hostile beach under fire, and immediately race inland, carrying 5,000 pounds of ammunition. The first combat deployment came in July 1943. Sicily, Operation Husky. The 3,206th Quartermaster Service Company brought 50 DUKWs. Senior officers remained skeptical. If the DUKWs failed, conventional landing craft would handle logistics. On July 10, 1943, at 0245 hours, the first DUKW entered the water 2 miles offshore. Waves ran at 5 feet beyond recommended operational limits. Engineers had predicted the DUKWs would swamp. They didn't. For 6 hours, DUKWs shuttled from ship to shore, delivering artillery ammunition, medical supplies, and water. While conventional landing craft waited for calmer seas, the DUKWs kept operating. They delivered 40% of all supplies in the first 24 hours. One observer noted, "They look ridiculous and sound impossible, but they work when nothing else does." That became the DUKW's unintentional motto. By September 1943, production ramped to 400 per month. By March 1944, 600 per month. Total wartime production would reach 21,147 units. But nobody had tested them in the one environment that would prove their true value: jungle rivers. January 15, 1945, Lingayen Gulf, Luzon, Philippines. The smell hit first: diesel fuel, salt water, and jungle rot, that distinctive odor of tropical vegetation decomposing in 90-degree heat. The 536th Amphibian Truck Company assembled on the beach, 42 DUKWs loaded with ammunition, fuel, and rations. Lieutenant Marcus Thompson, company commander, studied his maps. The operational plan called for his unit to support the 6th Infantry Division's advance inland. Standard doctrine: follow the main roads, deliver supplies to forward positions, return for more. Standard doctrine assumed roads existed. Northern Luzon had roads on maps. In reality, it had mud tracks that became rivers during rain, rivers that had no bridges, and terrain that turned 2.5-ton trucks into immobilized obstacles. Intelligence reports noted 17 significant river crossings between Lingayen Gulf and the Cagayan Valley. 17 opportunities for Japanese defenders to delay the American advance, while engineers constructed bridges. Thompson saw something different: 17 opportunities to drive straight through. "Sir, permission to speak?" Sergeant Robert Vance, Thompson's senior NCO, had driven DUKWs since Sicily. "These rivers, we don't need to bridge them. We just cross them." "The plan calls for engineer support." "Or screw the plan, sir, respectfully. The DUKW can ford up to 5 feet. Swim anything deeper. We've got 70 miles to cover. If we stop for bridge construction at every river, this advance takes a week. If we swim across, we do it in 2 days." Thompson looked at the map again. The Japanese expected conventional logistics. They'd positioned defenses to cover bridge sites. If the Americans didn't need bridges. "You're talking about crossing 17 rivers without engineer support." "I'm talking about crossing 17 rivers before the Japanese know we're there." Thompson made the kind of decision that either earns medals or courts-martial. Load up, we're going straight through. What happened next would rewrite Amphibious doctrine. The first river appeared 12 miles inland. The Beloy River, 90 meters wide, 8 feet deep, 3-knot current. Engineers estimated 4 hours to construct a pontoon bridge. The first DUKW entered the water at 11:15 hours without slowing down. Japanese observers watching from concealed positions saw something they couldn't process. American trucks driving into a river and continuing across. Not fording the water was too deep. Not using a bridge there wasn't one. The trucks were swimming. Corporal Hideaki Tanaka, positioned in a sniper hide 300 meters downstream, wrote in his diary, "The Americans have deployed boats shaped like trucks, or trucks shaped like boats. They cross the Beloy River as if it doesn't exist. I reported this to command. They accused me of fever delusions." In 47 minutes, all 42 DUKWs crossed the Beloy River. Total casualties, 0. Ammunition delivered to forward units, 105 tons. The Japanese expected the Americans to stop, build a bridge, consolidate. Instead, the American advance accelerated. Second river, the Arangay, 6 miles further, 110 meters wide, 10 feet deep. Japanese defenders had demolished the bridge and positioned mortars to interdict the crossing point. The mortars fired on empty air. The DUKWs crossed 400 meters upstream, where no bridge had ever existed. Third river, the Ambarayan. Fourth, the Abra. Fifth, 6th, 7th. By January 17th, American forces had crossed 9 rivers in 36 hours. Each time, Japanese defenders positioned to stop bridge construction found themselves outflanked by an amphibious supply column that treated rivers as temporary inconveniences. But the real demonstration of the DUKW's revolutionary capability came on January 23rd at the Cagayan River, the same location where Colonel Yamamoto had smiled confidently 18 days earlier. The Cagayan, at this point in northern Luzon, ran 140 meters wide with 12-foot depth in the main channel. Current, 4 knots. Bottom, soft mud. Banks, steep, heavily defended. Japanese engineers had demolished all bridges within 20 miles. Yamamoto's defensive strategy relied on one assumption: Americans needed bridges to advance their vehicles. At 0512 hours, lead elements of the 6th Infantry Division reached the south bank. Engineers began surveying for a pontoon bridge site. Estimated construction time, 8 hours. Lieutenant Thompson drove his lead DUKW to the riverbank. "Wait for the bridge?" Sergeant Vance asked. "Hell with that, we've got a schedule to keep." The DUKW entered the water at 0518 hours. Behind it, 41 more DUKWs followed in column, spacing 50 meters apart. They looked like a line of mechanical ducks following their mother. Japanese defenders opened fire at 0521 hours. Mortars, machine guns, rifle fire. They targeted the DUKWs in the river, slow-moving, exposed, apparently helpless. But the DUKW's steel hull wasn't truck-thin. It was boat-thick, and 5,000 pounds of cargo created a low profile. Machine gun rounds sparked off the hulls. Mortars bracketed the crossing but couldn't adjust fast enough for moving targets. By the time Japanese gunners calculated a firing solution, the DUKW had moved. At 0536 hours, the first DUKW climbed the north bank. Its wheels grabbed mud, dug in, pulled the vehicle up an 18-degree slope. At the top, it pivoted left and accelerated to 35 miles per hour, heading for forward positions 2 miles inland. The Japanese defenders, positioned to repel a bridge assault, found American supply trucks appearing in their rear areas. Yamamoto, receiving reports of swimming trucks, initially dismissed them as reconnaissance vehicles, amphibious jeeps, perhaps. When his staff reported the vehicles carried 5,000-pound loads, he demanded clarification. How many? At least 40, Colonel Sun. They continue crossing. Yamamoto did the math. 40 vehicles, 5,000 pounds each, equals 200,000 pounds, 100 tons of supplies delivered without a bridge, without construction delay, without warning. His defensive plan had accounted for artillery interdicting bridge construction. It hadn't accounted for vehicles that didn't need bridges. By 0645 hours, all 42 DUKWs had crossed the Cagayan River. Total time, 87 minutes. Casualties, 2 vehicles with minor damage from small arms fire, 0 personnel losses. American forces continued their advance without pause. In traditional operations, this river crossing would have consumed 12 hours. Engineers would construct a bridge while infantry secured the far bank. Vehicles would cross single file. Japanese defenders would have time to reinforce, reposition, prepare counterattacks. Instead, the American advance maintained momentum. Forward units never ran out of ammunition. Artillery never ran short of shells. The attacking force never slowed. Private First Class Thomas DiMaggio, infantry scout with the 6th Division, watched the DUKWs emerge from the river. 1 minute we're waiting for engineers to build a bridge, thinking we'll be stuck for half a day. Next minute, these weird boat trucks are driving out of the river dropping off ammo. The Japs must have thought we brought our navy inland. The psychological impact matched the tactical advantage. Japanese defensive doctrine relied on natural obstacles to slow American advances. Rivers created choke points where defenders concentrated firepower. Bridges became elimination points, where a few well-placed shells stopped entire columns. But the DUKW eliminated the choke point. Crossings could happen anywhere. Defenders couldn't concentrate on a single bridge because there was no bridge. Interdiction fire couldn't target construction because there was no construction. The Americans could cross wherever they wanted, whenever they wanted, however many times they wanted. On January the 28th, the 536th Amphibian Truck Company executed 12 separate river crossings in 7 hours. Some rivers appeared on maps. Others were seasonal waterways not documented. Didn't matter. The DUKWs crossed them all. Captured Japanese orders from this period reveal growing confusion. Enemy logistics display unprecedented mobility. River barriers provide no delay. Request tactical guidance for defending positions when enemy vehicles operate as boats. There was no tactical guidance. Nobody had written doctrine for defending against amphibious trucks because nobody had imagined they'd exist. But the DUKW's advantage extended beyond river crossings. February 12, 1945, 16:30 hours, near Baguio, northern Luzon. The monsoon hit with tropical intensity. 84 degrees Fahrenheit, 96% humidity, rain falling 2 inches per hour. The dirt road connecting the 6th Infantry Division to their supply depots transformed into a chocolate-colored river within 30 minutes. Conventional 2.5-ton cargo trucks, the workhorses of American logistics, bogged down immediately. Wheels spun uselessly in mud 18 inches deep. Drivers downshifted to first gear, made 50 feet, and sank to their axles. Within 2 hours, 37 trucks sat immobilized along a 3-mile stretch. The American advance, which had covered 70 miles in 12 days, stopped. At 18:15 hours, Lieutenant Thompson received the call. We need emergency resupply. Infantry's down to 40% ammunition. Can you get through? Thompson looked at the mud. How bad? Impassable. We've got trucks buried to the frame rails. Thompson walked to his lead DUKW. Sergeant Vance was checking the tire pressure. How much can we carry in this slop? Vance grinned. In mud? About 3,000 pounds to keep weight reasonable. But we won't get stuck. Can't get stuck if you're swimming. That statement deserves explanation. The DUKW's design included a peculiar feature: variable tire pressure. Each wheel had a system that could inflate or deflate tires while driving. On roads, you ran 40 psi for efficiency. In sand, you dropped to 15 psi for flotation. In mud, you went to 10 psi, creating massive contact patches that distributed weight. But more importantly, if the mud got deep enough, the DUKW simply floated. At 1845 hours, 6 DUKWs loaded with ammunition departed for the forward positions. The lead vehicle, driven by Corporal Michael Kowalski, entered the mud zone at 2 miles per hour. The wheels sank 8 inches. He dropped tire pressure to 10 psi. The wheels sank further, but maintained traction. At 12 inches depth, the wheels were barely touching solid ground. At 16 inches, they weren't touching at all. The DUKW was floating through the mud, using its propeller for forward motion and its wheels for steering. Kowalski radioed back, "I'm not driving anymore. I'm swimming through dirt. This is weird." But it worked. The 6 DUKWs reached forward positions at 2020 hours. They'd traveled 3 miles in 90 minutes through terrain that had stopped every conventional vehicle. They delivered 18,000 pounds of ammunition, evacuated 12 wounded on the return trip, and repeated the journey twice more that night. By dawn on February 13th, American infantry had full ammunition stocks. The advance resumed. Japanese intelligence officers, attempting to understand how Americans maintained logistics through impassable terrain, developed theories ranging from secret road networks to supply drops by cargo plane. The truth that American trucks could swim through mud seemed too absurd to credit. But a pattern was emerging. Every natural obstacle that should have delayed American forces proved ineffective. Rivers didn't slow them. Mud didn't stop them. Destroyed bridges didn't impede them. The DUKWs had created a logistics system that operated independent of infrastructure. On February 20th, this advantage reached its ultimate expression. The 6th Infantry Division had pushed into the Cagayan Valley, 70 miles from their supply depots at Lingayen Gulf. A conventional supply line required functional roads, or engineers to build them, bridges over 17 rivers, or engineers to construct them, favorable weather, or delays during monsoons, security along the entire route, or convoys got ambushed. The 536th Amphibian Truck Company demonstrated an alternative. At 0600 hours, 38 DUKWs departed. Lingayen Gulf loaded with ammunition, fuel, and medical supplies. They traveled existing roads where possible. Where roads were destroyed, they detoured cross-country. Where rivers blocked the path, they swam across. Where mud made travel impossible, they floated through it. They arrived at forward positions 70 miles away at 1420 hours. Travel time, 8 hours and 20 minutes. A conventional convoy requiring bridge construction at 17 crossings would have needed 4 days minimum. The DUKWs did it in a single day. But here's what changed everything. They didn't return to base. Standard logistics doctrine called for round-trip supply runs. Empty trucks returned to depots, reloaded, repeated the cycle. This meant half your vehicle fleet was always empty, consuming fuel while providing no benefit. The DUKW's amphibious capability enabled a revolutionary alternative: circular supply routes. DUKWs would load at coastal depots, deliver to forward units, then drive to the nearest coast and swim back to the supply ships offshore. No return journey on roads. No wasted capacity. This operation, eventually designated DUKWs, ran continuously from February 20th through March 15th, 1945. 70. DUKWs maintained a perpetual loop: inland delivery, coastal extraction, offshore resupply, repeat. The system delivered 4,300 tons of supplies in 3 weeks. For comparison, conventional truck logistics delivered 2,100 tons in the same period, using twice as many vehicles. Colonel Richard Sutherland, G4, logistics officer for the Luzon campaign, wrote in his after-action report, "The DUKW has effectively eliminated the concept of supply lines. In amphibious operations, every coastline becomes a supply depot. Every river becomes a highway. Infrastructure destruction, the primary Japanese strategy for slowing our advance, no longer impacts our logistics. We can supply forces anywhere water exists." Japanese commanders noticed the shift, but struggled to counter it. On March 3, 1945, Imperial Japanese Army Headquarters issued Tactical Bulletin 847J, titled Countermeasures Against Enemy Amphibious Vehicles. The document reveals their confusion. American forces deploy amphibious trucks, designation DUKW, capable of water and land operation. Defensive positions must account for points: 1. River crossings occurring at unpredictable locations. 2. Supply columns traveling without roads. 3. Rapid movement through the terrain deemed impassable. Recommended countermeasures: increase coastal defenses, mine likely water approaches, position anti-boat weapons on rivers. Problem? Number of potential crossing sites exceeds defensive capability. Enemy vehicles can cross anywhere. The final line was an admission of strategic defeat. You can't defend everywhere, and if the enemy can attack from anywhere, defense becomes impossible. On March 7th, the scenario from our opening played out. Colonel Yamamoto, still commanding defensive positions along the Cagayan River, had spent 3 weeks preparing for the American advance. He'd studied previous engagements. He understood the Americans had amphibious trucks. But understanding they existed didn't mean he could stop them. At 0512 hours, 47 DUKWs approached his position. Yamamoto's artillery fired, targeting the obvious crossing points. The DUKWs crossed 800 meters upstream, where he had no guns positioned. He repositioned his mortars. The DUKWs had already crossed and were heading inland. He deployed his reserve infantry to intercept. The DUKWs were traveling at 40 miles per hour on roads faster than infantry could march, faster than his messengers could warn outlying units. By 0630 hours, American forces had established positions 3 miles behind his river defense line. Yamamoto's carefully prepared fortifications, designed to stop a bridge assault, became tactically irrelevant. He recorded in his diary, "We prepare for conventional warfare. They wage unconventional warfare. How do you defend a river when the enemy treats it as a road?" The answer? You don't. March 15, 1945. Luzon campaign, 75 days after initial landing. The numbers told a story that military historians would debate for decades. American forces had advanced 210 miles from Lingayen Gulf to the northern tip of Luzon. They'd crossed 47 significant rivers defined as waterways, requiring bridge construction for conventional vehicles. Total time spent waiting for engineer bridge construction, 0 hours. The 536th Amphibian Truck Company had completed 2,847 individual river crossings. They delivered 8,200 tons of supplies, evacuated 1,340 wounded, and transported 4,200 personnel. Vehicle losses: 14 DUKWs, 3 to enemy action, 11 to mechanical failure. For comparison, conventional 2.5-ton truck companies supporting the same advance had delivered 6,100 tons, while suffering 127 vehicles lost or disabled. The DUKW's operational effectiveness exceeded conventional trucks by 34%, while suffering 89% fewer losses. But statistics don't capture the strategic impact. The Japanese defensive plan for Luzon relied on trading space for time. Unable to stop the American advance, they'd slow it. Every river became a delay. Every destroyed bridge bought hours or days. Infantry could retreat, regroup, prepare new positions. The strategy assumed American logistics would struggle to keep pace with combat units. Eventually, advancing forces would outrun their supplies, stall, consolidate, giving Japanese defenders time to reorganize. The DUKW shattered that assumption. American combat units never outran their logistics because logistics traveled at the same speed. Supply vehicles crossed rivers as easily as tanks. Ammunition arrived before units ran low. Medical supplies reached aid stations, while wounded still had a chance. The campaign that Japanese planners estimated would take 6 months lasted 11 weeks. Lieutenant General Tomoyuki Yamashita, commanding Japanese forces in the Philippines, surrendered on September 2, 1945. In post-war interrogations, he identified the DUKW as one of 3 factors that made continued resistance futile. "We could slow your infantry. We could damage your tanks. We could not stop your supplies. Your amphibious trucks made every position temporary. We would prepare defenses at bridges, and you would cross rivers without bridges. We would destroy roads, and you would drive through jungle." Traditional defensive tactics require the enemy to concentrate at choke points. You had no choke points. His assessment appears in U.S. Army Historical Division document 45J78, Japanese Operations in the Philippine Islands. But the DUKW's impact extended far beyond Luzon. Europe, April 1945, the Rhine River crossing. American forces faced Germany's last major natural barrier. The Rhine, 1,200 feet wide with 10-foot depth and strong current, represented a formidable obstacle. German engineers had destroyed every bridge. On March 22, 1945, Patton's Third Army reached the Rhine near Oppenheim. Engineers estimated 18 hours to construct a pontoon bridge. The 458th Amphibian Truck Battalion entered the water at 2200 hours that same night. Within 4 hours, they'd transported 4,000 troops and 200 tons of supplies across the Rhine without waiting for bridge completion. When German forces counterattacked the bridgehead at dawn, American defenders had full ammunition stocks and reinforcements ready. The counterattack failed. The bridge was completed at 1640 hours the next day, nearly 18 hours after the DUKW crossing had already secured the far bank. Pacific Theater, June 1945, Okinawa. Typhoon conditions made conventional beach operations impossible. Waves ran at 12 feet. Landing craft couldn't operate. Supply ships sat offshore, unable to deliver cargo. DUKWs, designed to handle 10-foot seas, pushed through the storm. They made 340 trips during the 3-day typhoon, delivering 680 tons of critical supplies to troops ashore. Without those deliveries, American forces would have faced ammunition shortages during a critical phase of the campaign. The operational reports are unanimous. The DUKW performed best in conditions that defeated conventional vehicles. By war's end, DUKW units had participated in every major amphibious operation after Sicily. Salerno, September 1943. 150 DUKWs, 40% of initial supplies delivered. Normandy, June 1944. 2,000 DUKWs, 60% of supplies delivered in first week. Southern France, August 1944. 500 DUKWs, primary supply method. Philippines, January 1945. 800 DUKWs, maintained logistics for 250,000 troops. Okinawa, April 1945. 600 DUKWs, operated through typhoon conditions. Scientific treaties. Total DUKW, UKW, Doors service. U production, 21,147 units. Total supplies delivered, estimated 18 million tons. Personnel transported, 2.7 million. Wounded evacuated, estimated 80,000. The vehicle that engineers called impossible and generals called unnecessary had become indispensable. But the human stories reveal more than statistics. Sergeant Robert Vance, who'd driven DUKWs from Sicily to the Philippines, was asked what made the vehicle special. His response, recorded in a 1946 interview, "It wasn't special. It was ugly, slow, top-heavy, and leaked. But it went places nothing else could go and did jobs nothing else could do." We used to joke that the DUKW was the vehicle you got when God ran out of good ideas and just welded random parts together. But I'd drive one before I'd drive anything else. Because when you're in a DUKW, water isn't an obstacle. It's just another type of road. Corporal Michael Kowalski, who'd swum through mud during the monsoon resupply, described it differently. The DUKW saved lives. Simple as that. How many guys died because ammunition didn't arrive in time? How many bled out because medics ran out of supplies? How many battles were lost because food and water didn't reach forward positions? The DUKW meant supplies always got through. Always. That's not a vehicle specification. That's a promise to the guy in the foxhole that he won't be abandoned. Japanese perspectives reveal frustrated respect. Lieutenant Hideaki Tanaka, who'd reported swimming trucks at the Baloy River, survived the war and published his diary in 1952, his entry from February 15, 1945. The American Duck, his term for the DUKW, represents their entire approach to warfare. Where we seek elegant solutions through superior tactics, they create crude tools that simply work. The Duck is not sophisticated. It is not beautiful. But it crosses rivers we believed uncrossable and delivers supplies through terrain we considered impassable. Our engineers would have spent years perfecting an amphibious vehicle. They would have optimized the hull shape, refined the propulsion system, created something technically impressive. The Americans welded a boat to a truck and called it finished. It looks ridiculous. It functions perfectly. I do not know which approach is superior, but I know which one. That observation cuts to the heart of the DUKW's significance. The vehicle succeeded not because it was the best boat or the best truck, but because it was good enough at both. American engineering philosophy embraced adequate performance everywhere over optimal performance somewhere. German engineers who designed specialized vehicles for every specific purpose never created an amphibious truck because they saw it as a compromise. Compromises were failures. American engineers saw compromise as flexibility. Good enough in multiple environments beats perfect in one environment. The DUKW embodied that philosophy. It wasn't fast in water, 6 miles per hour. It wasn't fast on land, 50 miles per hour. It wasn't well armored. It wasn't heavily armed. It wasn't comfortable. But it could cross a river, drive through mud, climb a beach, navigate a highway, ford a stream, swim through a swamp, and deliver 5,000 pounds anywhere water and land intersected. That capability, versatile adequacy, proved more valuable than specialized excellence. September 2, 1945, Tokyo Bay, aboard USS Missouri. As General MacArthur accepted Japanese surrender, a small detail went unnoticed. 2 DUKWs bobbed in the water nearby, ready to ferry dignitaries and supplies between ships and shore, if needed. They weren't needed, but they were there, ready. That became the DUKW's post-war legacy. The vehicle that won World War II continued serving for decades after. The U.S. military used DUKWs through the Korean War, Vietnam War, and into the 1980s. Foreign militaries, including Britain, Canada, Australia, and 23 others, purchased surplus DUKWs. But the vehicle's greatest post-war service came in civilian applications. Disaster relief workers discovered the DUKW could reach flooded areas when nothing else could. Hurricane response teams used them to evacuate survivors from inundated neighborhoods. Rescue services deployed them during floods. Tourist companies found another use: sightseeing tours. Modified DUKWs, still using the original 1940s design, operated in cities worldwide: Boston, Philadelphia, London, Singapore. The tours would drive through city streets, plunge into rivers or harbors, cruise through the water, then drive back onto land. Passengers today experience the same transition that amazed soldiers in 1943. The moment wheels leave solid ground and the vehicle becomes a boat. As of 2024, approximately 400 DUKWs remain in civilian operation. Some are original WWII Tu vehicles, 80 years old, still performing the mission Rod Stevens designed in his sweltering New York office. The vehicle that engineers called impossible outlasted most vehicles that were possible. But the DUKW's true legacy isn't longevity. It's a lesson in challenging assumptions. In 1942, everyone knew certain truths. Boats and trucks were separate categories. Amphibious operations required specialized craft and extensive preparation. River crossings required bridges or fording equipment. Logistics had to follow infrastructure. The DUKW proved all those assumptions wrong. What if the obstacle isn't an obstacle? What if the river is a highway? What if infrastructure is optional? Those questions seem obvious now. In 1942, they were revolutionary. Colonel Yamamoto, standing knee-deep in the Cagayan River, had planned his defense based on assumptions that had proven valid for 3,000 years of warfare. Rivers stopped armies. Bridges created chokepoints. Logistics required infrastructure. Those assumptions died at 0536 hours on January the 23rd, 1945, when the first DUKW climbed the north bank of the Cagayan and drove into his rear areas without using his bridge. Traditional military thinking would have dismissed the DUKW as impossible. A boat truck compromise that excelled at neither role? Tactically unsound. But warfare rewards what works, not what's theoretically optimal. The DUKW worked. It worked in Sicily's surf. It worked in Normandy's chaos. It worked in Luzon's rivers. It worked through Rhine's current. It worked when nothing else could. And it worked because someone asked a different question. Not, how do we build a better bridge? But, What if we didn't need a bridge? That question changed amphibious warfare forever. Japanese infantry, who'd mocked the swimming trucks, learned a lesson their commanders never taught: underestimate the impossible at your peril. The vehicle that looked ridiculous proved deadlier than the weapons that looked impressive. And somewhere in the after-action reports filed by American logistics officers in March 1945, there's a statement that summarizes everything. The DUKW has made water irrelevant to land operations. 8 words that redefined warfare. The rivers of Luzon still flow today, 80 years later. They're the same width, the same depth, the same obstacles they were in 1945. But they stopped mattering the day the DUKWs arrived.